So as you may know, I sold my Lumix along with all my lenses, and unfortunately that meant that I sold all my really tiny lenses as well. I had a little Olympus 17mm f1.8 that was just really nice for street photography. And that's not to say that there aren't small lenses for Sony full frame, there definitely are, and at equivalent apertures and even wider, but I just haven't bought any yet. So kind of my only recourse for the sort of standard focal range that I like to use for daytime street would be this lens right here, the Sigma 24-70 f2.8. Unless you're blind, this is a pretty big ass lens. And that's kind of something that I wanted to talk about in this video. I went out 2 different days with this lens. They were both kind of short, so I just decided to squeeze them into the same video. But I went out with this lens only, and you know, I started to get away from using larger lenses just because sometimes it's a bit cumbersome and it's very obvious that you're out taking photos, so it's a little bit harder to get candids, versus with something that doesn't protrude much from a Sony body. I mean, Sony bodies are already very small for being a full frame camera, but with something smaller that I will get eventually, you can sort of palm the camera if candids are what you're after. But the more I shoot street, the more I realize that for me, it doesn't really matter all that much that I'm taking candid photos. In my mind, there's 2 types of street photography. There's the sort of photo that's about the person, generally a lot more close up. I'm not a huge fan of doing that kind of street photography. I'm not against it, but it doesn't really do much for me creatively, and I don't really feel as much when I look at those photos, versus the way that I like to shoot is I like to include people in a larger scene. I like to utilize buildings and architecture and light and shadows, and it's more about people than it is about the person, if that makes sense. And any person really with a pleasing enough aesthetic walking into one of those scenes, for some reason I feel more when I see photos like that. So using a lens this big, it doesn't really affect me as much as it might some other people. I tend to find a spot, I frame up my shot, and I wait for people to come into it. So either way, whether I have a big or a small camera, chances are I'm holding the camera out. They know what I'm doing. If they don't mind being in the photo, they'll walk in. If they do, they'll usually stop. That's sort of the benefit of shooting like that, is that another person will come by eventually, and the photo might not be so different between the first and second subject. There's the obvious drawbacks to weight and size. It's not as comfortable to carry around all day, but that's what straps are for. And sometimes I just shoot for slightly less amount of time, and that's okay too. I will be getting a smaller prime for Sony, probably the Sony 35mm f1.8. I've heard it's great and sharp, and that's not necessarily because of its size and its ability to shoot candid photography, but more for its versatility for stuff like this, video work, and of course street. So anyway, let's jump into this video. As I said, it's 2 different days of shooting, both with the same lens on the A7IV, both of which were very different conditions. One was very bright and sunny, and the other one, it was freezing balls cold, like less than 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So I thought it'd be fun to sort of squish these 2 together and see what this lens can do for street photography with very different conditions. As always, don't forget to keep an eye open for the pug hidden somewhere in this video. If you're the first person to correctly post the timestamp where it's at, I'll cook your Thanksgiving dinner in the microwave, and I'll make sure that it's fully cooked so you don't get poisoned. Let's jump into the video. Yeah, all right, so here's the first day. It was a very warm morning. I went out well before noon. There's quite a few people out. It's been a while since I've shot this time of day, especially with this lens, so it took me a little while to get into the flow of things, but I ended up getting a couple pretty decent shots. I'm not really sure why I chose this. I wanted to just use these like chopped tree things and pine cones as my foreground. Nobody really ever came out. It was just people going in, so unfortunately I only got the backs of their heads. But I mean, even if they were coming out, it wasn't the best composition anyway. Taking a little seedy poo here on this bench type thing and using it as a foreground, and I caught this guy who was born in the wrong decade. So here's one of a few examples in this video where I'm becoming okay with using a larger lens again. It's very clear that I'm comfortable where I'm sitting. I'm not acting weird when these guys walk past. This guy saw what I was doing. He noticed and he didn't care and he kept walking. And you know, if you're gonna show somebody's face, I think it's important that they're relaxed as well as you. Otherwise, the uncomfortable and awkwardness will come across in the photo. And maybe some people like those kind of photos, but I just don't. I would much rather it just be a real snapshot of what's going on in the city and not my presence that's influencing the photograph. I thought for sure this one was gonna be trash because I really had like no time between her walking by and me framing up the shot. She wasn't really in focus, but once I converted to black and white and sort of played with the light and shadows, I think it actually came out kind of decent. I thought this one was kind of cool, and I was initially just planning on shooting all of them, and I zoomed out wide enough to get their whole bodies in, but then I realized in post that this kid's head was sticking out right in front of everybody with the light hitting it, so I actually ended up cropping it down a little bit to sort of highlight his face instead of the others. This second one here I actually really like because of how defined his shadow is on this pillar, but since it's a cylindrical pillar, it sort of stretched it and made it look a little bit weird too. I really enjoy those types of photos. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you might have seen the portrait of a photographer I did with Matthew Steffens. I'll put a link to it in the description, but he actually showed me this spot, and since then I've come back probably 5 or 6 times just trying to get somebody walking down these stairs. But it's a parking garage, so not a lot of people use every single staircase. And so I sat here for a good 5-10 minutes, and then finally this cello player came down, and that's when I realized that it's probably unlikely that normal people use this staircase, but it's just sort of the people that are actually working at the Bell Theater. I kind of like this one. The subject is very small in the frame, but I think it kind of works in my opinion. I was about to go around this sign, but I ended up including it, and for some reason it just sort of adds some depth to the photo in my opinion. This one was the last one of this day. I cut it short so I could get home to my grumpy little piggy. He gets upset when I leave him home for too long. But anyway, let's go into the next day where it was very, very different conditions. Alright, so this was like mid-afternoon. It was like 8 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was very cold. I almost didn't go out this day because I was really wanting to go shoot in some heavy snow, but it just never really materialized, and instead it was just extremely cold. So I could really only stand it for about 40 minutes, and even within that 40 minutes, I had to step inside the Wells Fargo Center a couple times to warm up, but it was actually awesome because they're really cool in there, and I've never been kicked out, and I was just able to take some photos inside the building. crouched down here trying to get somebody to walk right in the middle of this strip of light on the sidewalk, but a lot of times when you're crouched down like this, people tend to move to one side, and I get it. They don't want to walk directly into me. Either they don't want to be photographed, or they think they're being courteous, or they're just getting ready to go around me, but it's always really difficult to get somebody directly in front of you in situations like this. So I hopped inside the Wells Fargo Center. This place is gorgeous. I love the architecture. I love how clean and modern everything is in here. And the security just doesn't seem to give a shit. Like, every time I go into a place like this, I'm expecting to get kicked out, but in here they just don't. I don't know if they just don't care or if it's really not a rule that you're not supposed to be in here or something. I don't know, but one lady actually let me set up a tripod in front of the escalator one time and do a long exposure going down it. Like, they just don't care. So it gave me some time to warm up and sort of relax and get into the flow of things. There's a couple of these sky bridges over the roads in this building, and I slowed my shutter speed down to 1/13 and just handheld took a bunch of burst shots. I really need to get some faster memory cards for the A7IV because the buffer is just pretty rough. But even handheld at 1/13, pretty much all my shots were sharp enough. Found some steam over here across the street and this guy running to catch the bus or something. But this steam is sort of weak, but it is foreshadowing to some photos I got here in a few minutes. At this point, my fingers were starting to feel somewhat painful from being cold. It felt like needles, but this insane amount of steam pouring out of 16th Street Mall just called me over, and then the pain just disappeared once I started shooting. I don't really know what's going on with these steam vents this year, but I have never seen steam this thick in Denver. I'm sure it helped that it was really cold on this day, because I tried this spot in a couple videos ago I did with Ty, and it was nowhere near this thick, but it was definitely a lot colder on this day. Plus, the lack of wind really helped it to just sort of sit over the street. This next one might be my favorite out of both of these days shooting. I love that he's running, I love what he's wearing. I love the scarf over his face, and then of course just this epic background of just a sheer wall with a huge layer of steam right behind him. While I was hoping it would snow more, I wasn't actually expecting it to pick up this much, so I didn't bring my like waterproof camera bag thing, and instead I just brought this blower, which actually ended up working really well. I do not trust Sony cameras out in the elements. I've seen too many people take their cameras out in the rain and stuff, and it works for a while, but then they always end up having weird electrical problems. The screens die on them, or just other weird problems shutting off and stuff like that. I'm sure that the A7IV and the new bodies are better in this regard, but I still don't completely trust it, and I would rather just be safe than sorry, because I do not want to have to replace my camera. After one more short visit into Wells Fargo Center to warm my fingers, I decided it was probably time to call it a day because my toes were cold too, and sitting inside for a few minutes just wasn't really enough to warm them up. But I walked away pretty happy, and I'm really glad I went out this day. I almost didn't go, and I came back in just the best mood ever because I love the photos I got. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. You know, if your lens is big, don't be afraid to just go out there and try it. Just try to maintain your comfort levels, because if you're uncomfortable, it's going to come across, and it's more likely that it's going to look like you're doing something that you're not supposed to be doing. And you know, I wouldn't recommend just walking up to somebody and sticking a giant lens in their face, but again, I honestly personally don't recommend doing that even with a smaller camera, but that's just my style. For my style, this works perfectly well. Again, I am going to get a smaller lens to go with my Sony, but in the meantime, I really don't think that this is a problem. Anyway, I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next one.